Good evening, welcome to QUIZZY Monday. It's Easter Monday, but quizzing never sleeps. So we are back with another episode of QUIZZY Monday, and we're delighted that we've got George from Mastermind joining us. Now, we are getting towards the end of the series, the business end of Mastermind and University Challenge. The things are hotting up. And we're going to keep trying to bring you the very best guests and the very best discussion. But next week might be a little tricky. So just look out for notifications on that. We may or may not be able to broadcast live, but we will do our very best. Now, before we get George on, let's have a look at who won the Quiz and Team of the Week votes from last week. Counterpoint champion Catherine Johnson was your Quizzer of the Week last week. Second was Pat Gibson. Third was Liam Hughes. In Team of the Week, it was Southampton from University Challenge who were first. Second was Chaotic Good MILF Hotel. And third was Cambridge of the Quiz League of London. Don't forget, you can nominate anyone for Team and Quizzer of the Week. Go to tinyurl.com/ATQ nominations. Nominations close at 5 p.m. every Monday. And don't forget, you can put comments and questions in the chat. So far, Catherine telling us, hello, watching while eating some apple strudel and custard. Don't tell my diabetes nurse. And Gerard is saying, happy William of Ockham's Day. To say more would be superfluous. Oh, you're a card, Gerard. Let's bring George on and stop all that frippery. Evening, George.
Hi, Gareth.
Now, commiserations in losing a very, very tight semi-final. Would have been filmed quite some time ago.
Yeah.
Does time ease the pain?
It does, yeah. Immediately after I finished filming, I came straight out of the studio and said I want to start revising for next time in a few years. And yeah, I think a few months down the line, it's a little less painful to lose, but it's still losing on passes is a pretty annoying way to go.
Yeah, I mean, we always say first time on Mastermind is for reconnaissance, and it's a pretty good reconnaissance journey for you to get through to the semis. In fact, get so close to the final. But passes, we can't duck it. That was what decided it. You seem to pass very quickly, which, if you are going to pass, is the right thing to do. The worst thing in the world is to wait and wait and wait and then pass. Was that your deliberate strategy in that general knowledge round?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I know some people say never pass and always try and say something, but then I think there is an argument for passing that it is slightly quicker. And to be fair, I think it almost did work that way for me, in that I was very close to getting one more question in. My answer of Razorbill was right on the buzzer. And yeah, so I wasn't afraid of passing, but it was also partly just in the moment I didn't even have a plausible wrong answer in my head for those questions. It would have taken me a moment to come up with one.
And that is the dilemma, isn't it? Is weighing up if you can throw out a wrong answer or any answer, then that's fine. But if you can't, you don't want to eat up valuable time. Interesting you said about the Razorbill thing and it nearly working, because you had one general knowledge question fewer than Stuart.
Yeah.
So on such fine margins, potentially turn the fortune of a game like this. Did you when you were sat there, you were second up in general knowledge. You got a very, very good 13. You must have known at that point, okay, I'm in contention. And when is it William? William went and just fell short.
Yeah.
Were you starting to think, actually, I could do this?
Well, and both of the players who followed me, I was sitting there counting on my fingers. I knew exactly what they had left to do. And yeah, it was, I think when it came to Stuart, he did get to his 23 before the sort of wheel started even going round. So I did know that he'd made it. He didn't realize that he'd made it, but I was counting and I knew he'd made it well in advance of the time running out. So yeah, but I was quite happy when I sat back down. I thought 23 was a good target, but I knew it wasn't by any means unbeatable. So
yeah, not a slam dunk, but we have seen matches won with less, and even semi-finals won with less than that. Yeah. And he did start tripping up near the final with Sky and trench coat. That last Mauritania answer just took him over the line. Well, took him onto the line. But it must have been agonizing for you there, seeing him approach your score and then start missing things. And yeah. So we've kind of skipped a long way through to the final. I think it's great though that you're very kind of your reaction to losing in the semi-final is one of, okay, I want to get back on this horse
Yeah,
again.
absolutely.
Because for many people, it's, you put in so much work to do subjects for Mastermind, to do it twice and then to come so close. I guess for some people, the reaction is, never again. Your reaction is the opposite. What was it about being on Mastermind and doing so well that made you think, okay, 2 years down the line, 3 years down the line, I'm going to have another shot?
It was more just that, I feel I can do better than that. I was, although I don't think my performance was bad, I was annoyed that I got any questions wrong in any of my specialist subjects. You've got so long to study for it, you should get them all right, I feel. I know that's easy to say and hard to do, but I know I could do better than that. That's why I want to go back on it. And to be honest, I know they would never allow someone on 2 series in a row, but if they would let me on next time, I would go straight back on.
Wow.
And yeah, and I agree that it's hard to do the studying. It's very annoying not to be able to pick up a book that's not on your specialist subject on a whim and go off and read something different for a few months. I've certainly found that myself, but by the same token, it's really fun to study something in that much depth.
So why did you pick Nansen? Because he's a really fascinating guy, more than perhaps people would appreciate. But that brings with it so many more things that you got to learn, so much more complexity, more details, more people. What was it about Nansen that made you pick him?
Well, I first got interested in Nansen when I visited Tromsø in northern Norway a few years ago. I went to the North Norway Polar Museum there, and they had an exhibition about him, and that's when I first got interested in him. And then I went away and read biographies of him. Although, and you say it's quite a difficult subject because he had sort of two lives. He had the life as the explorer and the life as the diplomat and statesman. But really, he's not that difficult to study because there's relatively little written about him in English. And full Mastermind expect you to study in a lot of depth. They don't expect you to study in Norwegian. My Norwegian isn't good enough to read in books in Norwegian about him. There's really only one sort of modern book about him in English, so it's not that difficult to study that one book in a lot of depth.
Okay, so that's a smart piece of reasoning because you don't want there to be so many sources that you've got to be checking them all. With that one book and then going into it in massive depth, how did you approach getting that stuff in your head in such a way that you can then bring it out at a second's notice?
Like a lot of people, I'm a flashcard person. I put all my stuff into Anki and just study it over and over.
Right.
I know that's quite a common methodology, and it works for me as well.
Yeah, I mean, it's very good for getting, particularly for something like Mastermind, for getting into the short-term memory and, being able to bring it out immediately. How much of that is still there now?
To be honest, I think of the 10 I got in on the show tonight, I would have probably only gotten about 7 or 8 today. So it stuck with me much less than my first round subject, Portuguese wine. I still know that pretty well, but that's something I've studied for a lot longer than Nansen. So,
okay, well, we'll touch on that in a second. You got 2 wrong, and this is the thing that you said kind of exercised you a little bit, and when having not won, the homesickness camp and daily chronicle.
Yeah.
What was it about those 2? Were they in your studies, but you just couldn't bring them to mind, or?
Yeah, so both of them were mixing up 2 different things. So on Nansen coming back from the pole, there were 2 famous camps he stopped at. One was while he was still on the ice, and one was when he got to land in Franz Josef Land. And I mixed those up. I said the Hull, which was the one on land, where they asked for the one on the ice. And same thing with the newspaper. Actually, you heard that the question came up later on where they mentioned his debate in the Times, and that's what I was mixing up the Daily Chronicle with. So in both those cases, it was mixing up 2 different things in my notes. So that's a bit annoying.
So do you then start thinking, okay, what would I do next time to avoid that sort of mix-up? Because
you try and make markers in your mind of things you can confuse and learn a way to tell them apart.
Yeah, I mean, it is tricky to anticipate that and anticipate the phrasing of a question and the key word in a question that might lead you to one rather than the other. So it's tricky. So that was Nansen. You mentioned the Portuguese wines then. So Nansen, you'd kind of got interested in on a trip on holiday. Portuguese wines, what's the story there?
Yeah, wine's a big thing for me. I've been into wine since I was a teenager. I was president of my university's wine tasting society and blind wine tasting team. To be honest, I could have happily done wines of numerous countries, but I find Portugal very interesting. In fact, when I applied, I did ask them if I could do wine questions for every round, but they weren't having that. So
gone are the days when you can do that. I mean, there was a time.
Yeah.
So Portuguese wines, but as you say, you could have done multiple ones, because I'm always interested in the psychology of why you choose one subject rather than another. So Portugal, as opposed to perhaps France, because of the sheer variety you might get in France. Was there something about Portugal that was interesting, but also narrow enough that you could nail it?
Yeah, it's a relatively small wine country, both geographically and in terms of the amount they make. So in that sense, it's not that difficult to learn. But it's quite an interesting wine country because you name any wine country and they do use grapes from France. There's Chardonnay everywhere. There's Cabernet Sauvignon everywhere. Portugal's a bit different because Portugal is one of the only countries that uses almost entirely indigenous grapes. So that's why I find it a particularly interesting wine country.
So that's really interesting, because I'm always wonder about what drives somebody to kind of not only pick a subject but then have like the interest to keep going at it. And it's clear where you're interested in, not just wine but Portuguese wines in particular. So two good subjects. What would your final subject have been?
I can tell you what they assigned me as the reserve, but it wasn't my first choice. Off my list, they picked for me to do the whiskies of Islay as my. If I'd been called up as the reserve, that's what they would have asked me to do. But my first choice would actually have been Booker T. Washington.
Oh, very good. So another biographical subject.
Yeah.
All of the same challenges of Nansen in terms of a long life, influential, involved in lots of things. Very good subject, though. Islay whiskies, close to my heart. So I'd like to have heard that one. Okay, well, that's interesting. So we'll look out next time you're on to see which way you go with any of those. What do you make of the subjects the others picked tonight? We got 4AD, the record label, Christina Rossetti, and Jason Bourne.
Yeah, it's a really good range. Sort of half highbrow, half lowbrow for the four topics, which I like. It's good to see a mix. I really found the 4AD one the most interesting because I knew some of the artists mentioned there and some I was completely unfamiliar with. And yeah, some of them I went away and looked up afterwards, and I always like to learn about new music that I'm not familiar with, so that was a very interesting one for me. The other two were sort of a bit of a blank page for me. I don't know a lot about Christina Rossetti, and other than having seen the films maybe once each, Bourne's not a big thing for me either. So
no, I mean I kind of got some on the Jason Bourne ones, nothing on Rossetti or 4AD. A bit like you, it's like, oh yeah, I know these bands, but actually not in this depth or to this detail at all. So that was an interesting one for me. Halfway, very, very tight. We kind of touched on it, but 10, 10, 9, 11, very evenly matched semi-final. And there's going to be no poor players at this stage. But you're an experienced Quiz League player. You've done University Challenge. I don't think some of these have that sort of experience. Did you feel that perhaps you might have, when it came to general knowledge, just a little bit of an edge over them?
Not at the semi-final stage. I don't think you can think that way at the semi-final stage. Maybe someone will have a bad day and sort of the nerves will get to them, but no one who gets to the semi-finals is by any means a weak quizzer. I think so. I don't think you can think that way at the semi-final stage. Yeah,
very wise. I think sometimes it's tempting to kind of get too deep into your own head or put pressure on yourself in these situations. I do think that the very first time I went on, so my first heat, up against three people who were just happy to be there, and I was thinking I really ought to be winning this, and did start putting pressure on myself. I never did that again. Usually it was like, oh God, look at the people I'm with in this heat. Or I was more worried from that angle rather than thinking I should win. But yeah, very, very tight match. 18-22, 23-23. Taking away from that experience, then that mastermind experience, you said you want to go on again. Is there anything else now that you also think, yeah, I might have my eye on a different show?
Oh yeah, I've already got a couple of more applications in. I don't know whether I'm supposed to say what they are. I don't know. But yeah, I'm always keen to do more quiz shows. I've done a couple in the past, but those have been quite spaced out, 6 years apart each of them. But I'll probably try and do more in the future.
Yeah. Well, it was a great performance. It wasn't quite enough to get over the line tonight, but you did play it really well. You did very well in your specialist subject. A really good general knowledge, the best general knowledge of the night. There's not much more you can do than that. So it's a fantastic performance, as Chris says here. Fabulous performance, George. Well played. Yeah, it was tremendous. Now we had our competition to try and predict what might come up, and so in your subject we had Fram. In 4AD it was Bauhaus. Rossetti, it was In the Bleak Midwinter. Franca Potente and Paul Greengrass came up in Born, and France came up in General Knowledge. None of the most predicted answers came up, but we do have some hefty point scoring. Now let's see if I can bring up tonight's point scoring. So Tim Hall, not for the first time, is number one on the night. He got 6 points, including 3 points for predicting Chelsea in the general knowledge. He's the first person to get a general knowledge question correct. We have a clutch of players: Colin, Dave, Huang Yi, Pam, and Stuart on 2, and Elsa, Jake, and Paul all got 1 point, which means that the table now looks like this. Tim is way out in the lead on 16. Then we've got Ed and Yi in equal second, and then Paul in fourth, and Pam in fifth. So well done to everybody. And most importantly at this point, yeah, Pam, well done. I got 2, didn't notice. It's Pam's birthday today. So happy birthday, Pam. We've got a few people in the chat saying about happy birthday. Chris is saying, I watched an old Mastermind final on YouTube and contestants could do a previous specialist subject again. Odd. I remember that as well. I think certainly that was Magnus Magnusson era that I remember that from, and you could go back to an earlier subject rather than having to have a new one. If you had to go back to one of the subjects you've done this series, which would it have been, Wines or Nansen?
Definitely the Wines, yeah. I think I still know that one back to front, so yeah.
So that's eminently understandable that you would. Just have a quick look anywhere at the rest of the chat. No, I think there's just a lot of people wishing Pam happy birthday at this point.
Yeah, Pam was my pairs partner in Berlin at the Ultimate Quiz Championships. So yeah, happy birthday, Pam.
Pam says, I told George my birthday evening would be watching him on Mastermind. Well, there you go. Well, that's good. Pam is a lovely person, and it's great that we can celebrate her birthday with you. Paul saying, this is the best placing I've had on any quiz. Love it. There you go. The prediction competition. You found your home, Paul. Any last thoughts on Mastermind, George?
Yeah, I just thought I'd mention that it was interesting that Stuart didn't realize he'd won. I could tell when he was coming back to his seat that he looked disappointed, whereas I knew he'd won because as I said, I was counting. So yeah, it was interesting to see in his interview at the end that he said exactly that he hadn't realized until Clive announced it that he'd won, which I thought was quite interesting.
Do you think he didn't realize that the passes would come in?
I just think he'd forgotten what the number he was aiming at was. Maybe I'm wrong, but that's the sense I got.
No, I can totally empathize with that, because in the pressure of the studio and the maelstrom and everything, you don't really quite know what's going on at times. So yeah, I can well believe it. But yeah, and of course you can't really count when you're doing the questions as well yourself. So yeah, sat down in contestants row, and that's the first time he hears that he's the winner. Well, he played well. In fact, he's played well twice now. He's in the final. Final is, I believe, in 2 weeks' time. So we look forward to seeing him. And we've got a few of the finalists will be coming on the show that night. I think we've got one more semi-final to go, and then we'll know our lineup. But yeah, congratulations once more, George. Now let's have a look at the What is the Question competition for last week and this. Well done to Kelly Hamer, who won last week's What is the Question with this question, which is the only word to appear in only one Eurovision winning song title, in only one National Television Award winning programme title, in only one Costa/Whitbread Book Award winning novel title, and in only one film title on the latest Sight and Sound poll of the greatest films of all time. Wow, congratulations, Kelly. This week's answer in need of a question is Grace, and you can now vote on the long list at tinyurl.com/WITQGrace. Voting is open till Wednesday evening when we release a shortlist to find a winner. And if you want to submit questions for What is a Question, well, we release a new answer in need of question every Sunday morning on Facebook and Twitter. All you have to do is reply to that post with your question. Deadline for sending in questions is Monday at 4 p.m. Okay, so University Challenged. George, as a University Challenge alumnus yourself, do you watch UC avidly?
Yes, always have done ever since I was a kid. Yeah.
So you'll have been following this series, and you'll have known that there were a number of things at play tonight. Bristol and UCL had both already won one of their quarterfinal matches. There's been a lot of chat about kind of the average age of the UCL team, and some people grumbling about that. Hey, it's in the rules, so I'm not quite sure what the grumble is about. But Salmon, their captain, has been absolutely fantastic all the way through the series. And then on Bristol, a very strong team too, and McLaughlin particularly really strong. So it was always going to be interesting to see how those two teams matched up. But I was quite surprised at quite how dominant Bristol were. Do you think it was simply speed on the buzzer there?
It certainly looked that way to me. Yeah, I think it did. Given their past performance, you wouldn't think that there would be a huge imbalance in terms of knowledge there. I think it did look like it was predominantly speed on the buzzer to me. Yeah.
And it almost felt like the longer it went that there was pressure on Salmon as captain. Uncharacteristically, he got 3 negs and only 1 correct buzz, where in a previous match he got more buzzes than everybody else in the show combined. So I think, again, I guess if you know you're up against a really strong team, then that can maybe force you to go earlier than you otherwise would. I mean, you've been there. Do you stick to your guns and stick to your game plan, or do you kind of go a bit more aggressive when you feel you need to?
Yeah, I recall I did go very early on one question and got it wrong back when I was on years ago. And more generally playing Quiz Bowl, not on television, I do think when you're captaining, you do have that pressure on you. I think tonight there was one in particular that stood out for me. I think it was, I forget who it was, but there was the buzz on Taurus, which seemed a perfectly understandable buzz at that point in the question. And the question then veered off in a different direction.
Yeah.
But yeah, sometimes you do feel that pressure to go early. When you're
that
behind.
was Fleetwood Walker for UCL. And I guess also at that point they were well behind. But as you say, very plausible question. You didn't know it was then going to veer into then kind of how they get deformed. I can't remember the phrasing that was used in the answer, but yeah, it felt very unfortunate. They just couldn't get going, UCL.
Yeah.
And Bristol were just, 4 buzzes right off the bat really is just such a strong way to start a show. How much, because we've heard from contestants that actually you just kind of swept up in the game, but how much does kind of confidence ebb and flow in the heat of battle?
I've only ever played my 2 University Challenge matches on television, and that was more than 10 years ago now. And having said that, I do recall feeling a bit downhearted when we fell behind in my second match that we got through to in the second round. But again, I've played lots more Quiz Bowl since then, and yeah, even when it's not on television, you do sometimes feel like you're very much under pressure when you're full behind. You've got to chase, and I think personally I don't feel as much sort of overconfidence when I'm ahead. as I do feel the pressure when I'm behind when I'm playing Quiz Bowl, and the pressure to sort of get in there before the strongest player on the other team. You always think they're going to know this clue, so I've got to go now.
Yeah. I suppose it's probably a little bit different with something like Quiz Bowl, where you know exactly how many starters there are going to be, and exactly therefore where you are in the game. You know broadly where you are in the game with University Challenge, but you don't necessarily know how many more opportunities you're going to have to get in.
I wonder if a lot of people are doing the maths on that, though, or if it's just sort of on either format, whether it's just a sort of estimate in their head of how far they are behind.
Yeah, I know when we had Imperial on last series, they would use the second picture round as the marker of the 2/3 point in the show, and so they knew they were kind of on the homeward lap, and if you were behind, you had to kind of speed up, or perhaps take a little bit longer conferring. Talking of conferring, when it's going well for you, you're picking up all sorts of things. Your team dynamics are working really well. I thought there was some really good team dynamics at times on show, particularly from Bristol. I really like the Warsaw Ghetto picture teamwork, because it really was, there's some language and there's Hebrew and all it looks East European, and then they worked their way to Warsaw Ghetto. I thought that was superb teamwork. How much do you think a captain can influence that and kind of pull people together in the moment?
Yeah, I think I captained my University Challenge team back in the day, and I think it does depend on how experienced you are as a team together, how well you know each other's strengths and weaknesses. My team, we played the intercollegiate quiz at Oxford, so we played together quite a bit before, but I know a lot of University Challenge teams haven't played a lot together, so I think it can really depend on how well the captain knows the other players on the team and how much experience they have working together. But I agree, in that particular case tonight, those questions, it's quite rare to see that sort of piecing together clues in a question in such a short time. So that was quite impressive.
Sorry, I've just been distracted by something that came up in the chat. Were there any buzzes that particularly impressed you tonight?
I'm trying to think now. Off the top of my head, I'm struggling to think. I'm sure there must have been.
I thought what was interesting, actually looking at it, that there was 2 rap starters.
Oh yes, those are very good. Yeah.
So there was Jay-Z, and then there was the audio one of Kanye West. Yeah. Have you noticed that the kind of the curriculum changed since the time you were on and broadened out? Would you have been revising rap back in your day?
Probably not. And I know they've got new questions editors on University Challenge fairly recently who've made a point about trying to sort of broaden the curriculum and introduce more diversity into the questions. And I do think, tonight is a good example of that. But yes, that Jay-Z buzz was very impressive, because I think the buzz came halfway through the second album title that was being read out, which and they weren't by any means his most famous albums. At least I don't think so. So that was a very good buzz. Yeah,
that was Jacob McLaughlin, who he's a very good player. 5 starters tonight. It was just that's the sort of kind of tentpole performance that a team can build around, isn't it? Somebody getting in nice and solidly, everybody else chipping in and then converting their bonuses when they get them. Now, Chris says these students are amazing, but judging by social media, they're a bit dim because they didn't recognize REM from a 40-year-old song that was anywhere near a hit record. Yeah, Radio Free Europe. You know, the most you're hoping with that, if you don't know the song, is that you recognize Michael Stipe. So I didn't feel, some of the brickbats that were thrown at them online were not fair. But that's the peril, isn't it, of putting sort of 40-year-old songs out in front of 21-year-olds.
I'm very guilty of that myself. I think my biggest quiz Achilles heel is music from before my time, as it were. I've made an idiot out of myself many times in quiz league matches trying to answer those sorts of questions where I really shouldn't.
Yeah, and it's really exposing when you're on TV and you're having discussions about, should we go for the Beach Boys or such and such. And of course, if you know if you know what the answer is, you know that that's a long way off being correct. But what choice have you got in that moment? You've got to come up with something. You want to try and
Yeah.
fish out an answer. I guess you have to throw caution to the wind and be prepared to say something that is that appears dim, for one of the better phrase than Chris put. When you were on, you probably didn't have to contend with the Twitterati and all of that sort of thing, and all the people, all the trolls making unkind comments, I guess.
I think Twitter was just about around back then, but yeah, it probably wasn't as aggressive.
Yeah. Would that have made you play things differently? It's all hypothetical, but if you were doing it now, would you approach it differently, knowing what goes on?
No, not at all for me. I avoid social media entirely, so I really don't care what goes on there.
Well, that's a very good approach. There was one other thing tactically which has been noted this series as happening a lot, and you don't know whether it's down to the edit. But it's when somebody buzzes in and negs, and then somebody from the opposite team buzzes in without hearing the rest of the question.
Yeah.
And Salmon did that tonight, and that's happened quite a lot. Is there something about the pressure of the situation that people just do that? Because in a quiz bowl match, you would make a point of sitting back and hearing the rest of the question.
Yeah, and University Challenge being a timed format is slightly different because if you're chasing, there is an argument for trying to buzz quicker. But yeah, it's I find it annoying, and if I was the captain, I would have explicitly told my teammates not to do so. I don't understand it. I think you lose very little by waiting and hearing the end of the question, unless you're really, really under time pressure. There's no real reason to do that.
I just wonder if there's a bit of buzzer fever. You go in for the buzzer, you're fractionally beaten. The person on the other team doesn't give the answer you were going to give, so you think, oh well, it must be my answer, and buzz in. I'd really like to know the psychology of it. If we could get Salmon on, or one of the players who've done that, that would be really interesting.
Again, there might be an element of vanity to it, wanting to beat your teammates to the answer, but that's a very poor excuse, I think.
Well, I mean, it was out of character for Salmon because he'd been so good all series, and does get at least one more chance to show how good he is, which is great. In bonus sets, I'm trying to think if I like the Holocaust Memorial picks. The Dramatis Personae one, I have to say I struggled on that. The starter was fine, but I struggled on the rest of those. It wasn't a set of bonuses that, apart from the music one, that particularly played well to my strengths tonight. How did you feel it watching?
Yeah, I think I was the same. They weren't my strong points. For some reason, I found the layout of the picture format one on the Dramatis Personae one distracting as well. The sort of upstairs downstairs thing. I found that I would have almost, if they'd just been laid out in a straight list, it would have been easier for me, I think.
Yeah, because effectively all you were doing was looking and seeing if you could recognize some names. For me, the actual structure of it didn't matter at all. It was do I know any of these names? But there you go. Anything else on University Challenge that kind of piqued your attention tonight? Gameplay, questions, or anything?
Just like you said, I was just surprised that it was so one-sided. I think I was expecting a much closer match, really. That was the only other thing.
I mean, 205 points in a quarterfinal against another previous winner. That's just phenomenal. I think at this point, Bristol now have to be one of the teams to really watch in this competition. Really impressed by them. But UCL, they've got one more shot at this. So who knows what they can come up with. In the chat, people are chatting. I only got started because of Miss Malaprop. Yes, that was me. None of the bonuses. Yes, that was me. The bid to Budapest still didn't get it. Oh, Chris, you should have seen my pictures from my trip. That is very moving. That the shoes by the Danube. Yeah, so there were some good questions, great play, but actually it's just all about Bristol tonight. They were just so good. And Keeler, actually, it was sung the praise of McLaughlin, but Keeler got 1, 2, 3, 4 starters as well. And the captain, Richardson, got 3. So really good all-round performance from Bristol. So that is Mastermind. We are going to very quickly say thank you to our patrons and then do the nominees for Quizzer and Team of the Week. And when we come back, George and I will rack our brains for the champagne moment of the evening. We might be lower on numbers, but we're not low on quality this week. For Quizzer of the Week, the nominees are Ian Bailey, the Mimirs Well Snowdrop League champion. He also top scored in Brain and London's semi-finals. Scott Dalglish, who scored 7 out of 8 in the OQL Cup, in the lowest ranked team of people to do so. Tonight's Mastermind winners nominated. Long Win got 7 out of 8 in OQL USA Cup, as did Ryan Rosenberg. And finally, Matt Williams won the Pop Culture Challenge Tier 1 final. For Team of the Week, Buzzsaw got an extremely high-scoring win at OQL USA's Cup. The Greek Geekers annihilated the Eggheads on the TV show. The Motley Crew won the Quiz Nation's Asia Pacific title. Another team called the Motley Crew got the top net score in the OQL Cup. And tonight's University Challenge winners. And finally, we have some shout-outs from Quiz Nation's Asia Pacific. Rick Baker was the guest captain of the week for the Worthy Adversaries. The Worthy Adversaries were level with Keep the Faith at the halfway stage, but ended up winning by 9 points, so they're getting a shout-out for that performance. You can now vote at tinyurl.com/QW10APR23. That's tinyurl.com/QW10APR23. Voting is open until Friday, and we'll release the winner. So those are the nominations. Don't forget to get your votes in. And a number of Mimir competitions came to an end. Pam, sorry for the spoiler. But that is up on YouTube for you to watch. And equally, you can watch shortly the Pop Culture Challenge final. Chris Dyson is saying, forgot to nominate Team Northeast for overcoming a 6-point deficit in the last round of the OQL Cup. Don't forget tinyurl.com/ATQ nominations to get your nominations in each week. George, from tonight's quizzing, can be anything. Mastermind, University Challenge, The Chase, whatever. Was there a kind of standout moment for you, a favourite moment?
Well, yeah, it wasn't a moment I particularly enjoyed at the time, but I think watching it back on TV, it's the moment where Stuart realised he'd won, despite thinking he hadn't, clearly. It clearly took him by surprise. And like I said, I didn't very much enjoy that moment at the time, but it was good television.
Yeah, no, that's a sweet moment. I think for me, it was that Warsaw Ghetto teamwork. I love a piece of teamwork on University Challenge, and as you say, piecing bits together in a live environment against the clock was my favourite. I have to say, also, going back to the nominations, and without wishing to influence the nominations, but I watched the Pop Culture Challenge final last night, which Matt Williams won. And that was a fantastic quiz and fantastic performance by him and Jonathan Gibson, who he tied with and beat in a tiebreaker. When that goes live on YouTube, check that out. And if you want a brutal Mimir to watch, the Mimir's Well final was tough. I think Joey Goldman said probably the toughest set they've had for quite some time. But when you've got quizzes like Victoria Gross and Ian Bailey, you've got to make it hard. So there's some good stuff to be catching up on online. We've put out some stuff in the last week. We did a preview of that Pop Culture Challenge Tier 1 final. You can now watch that back. So if you want to find out who the hell Matt Williams is and how he gets to win something like Pop Culture Challenge, then watch that. We also put out a video about how to remember the order of the taxonomic ranks. And we've got some stuff coming. We are going to be at the Celtic Nations Championship in Cardiff next weekend. So we'll almost certainly be doing some filming from there. May go live, but we don't know. But we will be doing some stuff from there. And we don't know what our Wi-Fi is going to be like in our Airbnb, which is why we don't know if we'll be live next Monday. So that is it for this week's Quizzy Monday. Thanks so much, George, for coming on. I think it takes a special kind of person to come on when they've lost, and to still be up for discussing it with good humor and insights, etc. It's very easy to come on when you've won a match. But I really appreciate you coming on tonight, and it was great having you. Thanks so much to everybody who has been chatting away in the chat as usual. Don't forget to vote in What Is the Question at tinyurl.com/WITQGrace, and don't forget to vote for Quizzer Team of the Week at tinyurl.com/QW10APR23. Pam says, thanks, Gareth and George and Valerie. There you go, never forgetting Valerie. And just to round off the night, the apple strudel was delicious, says Catherine. On that bombshell, if we're not back next week, we'll definitely be back the week after. In the meantime, have great quizzing and stay safe, and we'll see you again soon. Goodbye, everybody.